Chapter 1. The Weight of Ink. Lady Henrietta Vale stood in the library of Harrow House, her gloved fingers pressed flat against the cool marble of the mantelpiece, and tried very hard not to set the Duke of Harrow on fire with her stare. It was not going well. The room itself was an offence, all dark oak and hushed grandeur, the kind of space designed to make a person feel small. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors loomed from gilded frames, their painted eyes following her with what she imagined was smug disapproval. The fire crackled indifferently in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the mountain of documents spread across the Duke's escritoire. And there, behind that desk, sat the man himself. Sebastian Harrow, the 9th Duke of Harrow, was precisely as she remembered him from the 2 occasions they had met 6 years prior, immaculately dressed, unreadable as stone, and possessed of an unnerving ability to sit so still that one might mistake him for part of the furniture. His cravat was a perfect white waterfall against the stark black of his coat. His dark hair was cropped short, without a single strand out of place. His jaw could have been carved by a sculptor with an excessive fondness for straight lines. He was, she had to admit, infuriatingly handsome. But Henrietta was not here to admire architecture or aristocrats. She was here to fight. "Let me be certain I understand," she said, her voice deceptively calm. The word certain came out clipped, each consonant a small blade. "My father, in what I can only describe as a temporary lapse of judgment, appended a codicil to his will naming you, as guardian to my brother and sisters." The Duke did not look up from the letter he was reading. "That is correct. In perpetuity. Until Thomas reaches his majority, yes, or until such time as he chooses to assume the responsibilities of the family estate." A pause. "Or until you marry, Lady Henrietta. The codicil makes provision for that as well." Henrietta's fingers tightened on the marble. The cold bit through her gloves. "I have no intention of marrying." Now he did look up. His eyes were a peculiar shade of grey, like the winter sky before a storm, and they held about as much warmth. "Then I shall remain guardian until your brother turns 25. 8 years is not so long." "Not so long for you, perhaps." She straightened, abandoning the mantelpiece to stand in the centre of the rug, a general without an army. "You do not know my siblings, Your Grace. You have never met Thomas. You have never played spillikins with Caroline or listened to Eleanor recite her Latin conjugations. You are a stranger to them, and they are to you, and yet my father saw fit to hand them over like parcels of land." The Duke set down his letter. Slowly, deliberately, he rose. He was tall. Henrietta had forgotten how tall. She had to tilt her chin to hold his gaze, and she did so with every ounce of defiance she possessed. "Your father," Sebastian said, "was my godfather. He was also a man of considerable intelligence and foresight. If he chose to amend his will 6 months before his death, I am inclined to believe he had excellent reasons." "Excellent reasons," Henrietta repeated, her voice rising despite herself. "My father was ill, Your Grace. He was in pain. He was not himself." Something flickered across the Duke's face, too fast to name, gone before she could grasp it. "I saw him a fortnight before he died. He was in full possession of his faculties. He spoke to me at length about his concerns for the future of his children." "His concerns?" Henrietta laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. "Let me tell you about his concerns. He was concerned that I, at 22 years of age, had not yet secured a husband. He was concerned that I was too headstrong, too opinionated, too inclined to manage matters that ought to be left to men." She ticked the phrases off on her fingers. "He was concerned that I would raise Thomas to be a scholar instead of a sportsman. And he was very concerned, extraordinarily so, that without a man at the helm, the Vale family would sink into obscurity and ruin." She stopped, breathing hard. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. The Duke regarded her for a long, silent moment. Then he said, "I am sorry for your loss, Lady Henrietta. Whatever you may think of me, please believe that." The sincerity in his voice was unexpected. It threw her off balance just for an instant. She rallied quickly. "If you are sorry, then renounce the guardianship. Sign the papers I have brought. Return my family to me." She gestured to the stack of documents she had laid on the corner of his desk. The legal instruments she had paid a solicitor 50 guineas to draft, painstakingly worded to return control of the Vale household to its eldest daughter. Sebastian glanced at them. He did not touch them. "I cannot." "You will not." "I cannot," he repeated, "because it would be a violation of your father's trust and a disservice to your siblings. The codicil is explicit. I am to oversee their education, their finances, and their welfare until such time as the conditions are met. I have accepted that responsibility, and I do not abandon my responsibilities." Henrietta wanted to scream. She wanted to shake him. She wanted to grab the candlestick from the mantel, and no, she was a lady, she was a Vale. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her lose control. "Very well," she said, drawing herself up to her full height, which still left her several inches shorter than him. "If you will not renounce the guardianship, then you will have to contend with me. I will not be sidelined, Your Grace. I will not be reduced to a guest in my own home. My siblings will remain with me, in the Vale house, under my care. You may write your cheques and review the ledgers and call yourself guardian if it pleases you, but I will be the one who raises them." She expected him to argue. She expected him to cite legal precedents, invoke his authority, deliver a lecture on the proper order of things. Instead, he simply nodded. "That was always my intention." Henrietta blinked. "I beg your pardon." "I have no desire to remove your siblings from the only home they have ever known." He walked around the desk, moving with a quiet economy of motion that reminded her of a large cat, unhurried, aware of its own power. "Nor do I wish to displace you, Lady Henrietta. Your father spoke of you often. He said you were the heart of that household. To take you out of it would be to destroy the very thing I am meant to protect." She stared at him. The firelight played across his angular features, softening them slightly, revealing the faint lines of fatigue at the corners of his eyes. He looked, she thought, tired. Not in the way of a man who had stayed up too late, but in the way of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "Then what?" she asked slowly. "Do you intend to do?" "I intend to fulfill my duties as guardian." He picked up a leather-bound ledger from his desk, opened it to a marked page. "I will review the accounts monthly. I will approve all significant expenditures. I will interview tutors and approve curricula. I will, when necessary, make decisions regarding your brother's future, his university, his grand tour, his eventual entry into society, and I will visit. Quarterly at minimum. Perhaps more often in the beginning until we establish a rhythm." Henrietta's mind was racing, cataloguing objections, preparing counter-arguments. But beneath the clamour of her thoughts, something else was stirring. A grudging recognition that his terms were not as draconian as she had feared. He was not proposing to lock her in the attic or sell her siblings to a workhouse. He was proposing to be involved, annoyingly, intrusively involved, but involved nonetheless. "And if I refuse to cooperate?" she asked. "If I make your visits so unpleasant that you decide the whole arrangement is more trouble than it is worth?" For the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered in those grey eyes. "Then I would admire your tenacity, Lady Henrietta, but I would not change my mind." "You are impossible." "So I have been told." He closed the ledger, returned it to the desk. "May I offer you some tea?" You have travelled a long way, and you look as though you might benefit from sitting down. It was such a mundane offer, so utterly at odds with the battle they had just fought, that Henrietta felt her composure crack. She pressed her lips together, forced her shoulders to relax. "No," she said. "Thank you. I should return to my siblings. They have been without me for 3 days, and Caroline tends to worry." "Of course." He walked with her to the door of the library, opened it himself, no footman, no pomp. "I will call upon you at Vale House next week. We can begin going through the accounts together." "I look forward to it with every fibre of my being," Henrietta said, with such elaborate insincerity that a lesser man might have winced. The Duke of Harrow merely inclined his head. "Until then, Lady Henrietta." She swept past him into the corridor, her boots clicking on the black and white marble floor. She did not look back. She would not give him the satisfaction. But as the heavy door of Harrow House closed behind her and she stepped out into the grey London afternoon, she found herself thinking not of the battle she had won, for she had won, had she not? She had kept her family, but of the man she had left behind. There was something beneath that marble exterior, she was certain of it, something he was hiding. The question was whether it would prove to be a weakness she could exploit, or something far more dangerous. Chapter 2. Quarterly Visits. The first visit was a disaster. Sebastian arrived at Vale House on a Tuesday morning, precisely at 11 o'clock, dressed in his usual impeccable grey. He brought with him a leather satchel full of ledgers, a silver pencil, and an expression of such severe concentration that the footman nearly dropped his hat. Henrietta received him in the morning room, which she had deliberately chosen over the more formal drawing room as a subtle assertion of domestic authority. The room was bright and cluttered, books stacked on every surface, a half-finished embroidery frame abandoned on the settee, a collection of seashells arranged on the windowsill by Eleanor. It smelled of beeswax and old paper and the faint sweetness of Caroline's lavender water. It was, in every possible way, the opposite of Harrow House. "Your Grace," Henrietta said, rising from her chair with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "How punctual of you." "I find punctuality to be a form of respect," he replied, setting his satchel on the table, "for both oneself and others." "How admirable. Shall we begin with the household accounts? Cook has been most anxious about the price of flour." They spent the next 2 hours going through figures. Sebastian asked pointed questions about every expenditure over £5. Henrietta answered each one with painstaking detail, watching his long fingers move across the page as he made notes in a hand so precise it looked engraved. It was, she decided, going to be insufferable. Then Thomas came home from his riding lesson. The boy was 12, with his father's sandy hair and his mother's stubborn chin. He burst into the morning room without knocking, still in his mud-spattered boots, and skidded to a halt when he saw the stranger at the table. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Thomas," Henrietta said sharply. "Mind your manners. This is the Duke of Harrow. He is your—" "Guardian," Sebastian finished. He rose from his chair, slowly, so as not to startle the boy, and extended his hand. "I knew your father, Thomas. He spoke of you often." Thomas looked at the offered hand. Then he looked at Henrietta. Then he looked back at Sebastian, his young face twisting into an expression of pure, undiluted suspicion. "I don't need a guardian," he said. "I have Hen." And before anyone could respond, he turned and fled, his boots thundering up the stairs. Henrietta felt a small, vicious surge of triumph. "There," she thought. "See how well your guardianship works when the subject refuses to cooperate." But when she glanced at Sebastian, she saw that he was not angry. He was not frustrated. He was looking at the empty doorway with an expression she could not quite read, something between sadness and understanding. "He has your spirit," the Duke said quietly. The words were so unexpected that Henrietta forgot to be triumphant. I beg your pardon. Thomas, he has your spirit. Your father mentioned that as well, said you were the only person in the world who could make the boy mind. Sebastian returned to his chair, picked up his silver pencil. We will try again next quarter. These things take time. The second visit was better. Not good, precisely, but better. Sebastian arrived with a new strategy. Instead of closeting himself with Henrietta in the morning room, he asked to see the schoolroom. He spent an hour reviewing the children's lessons with their tutor, a mild-mannered vicar named Mr. Peel, who stammered whenever he was nervous, which was approximately all the time. He asked Eleanor, who was 9, to recite her Latin declensions. He asked Caroline, who was 14 and prone to dramatic sighs, to explain the difference between a metaphor and a simile. Caroline got it wrong. Sebastian corrected her without condescension. Caroline, who had been prepared to hate him on principle, looked momentarily confused. He's not what I expected, she confided to Henrietta that night, as they sat together in front of the fire. He's not mean. Mean is a low bar, Henrietta said, more sharply than she intended. One can be perfectly pleasant and still upend an entire family. Caroline gave her a look that was far too knowing for a girl her age. You don't like him because he's not father. That is absurd. Is it? Caroline pulled her shawl tighter. Father put him in charge because he trusted him. Maybe we should too. Henrietta had no answer to that. She stared into the flames and tried to ignore the small, traitorous voice in her head that whispered, "She's right. You know she's right." The third visit, everything changed. It was November, grey and bitter cold. Henrietta was in the kitchen, arguing with cook about the price of mutton, when a footman appeared with a pale face and a piece of paper in his trembling hand. "My lady," he said, "there's been an accident." Thomas, it transpired, had gone skating on the Serpentine with some friends from school. The ice had been thinner than it looked. He had fallen through. By the time Henrietta reached the lake, he was already out, pulled from the water by strangers, wrapped in coats, shivering violently as someone ran for a physician. But he was not safe. He was barely conscious, his lips blue, his skin the colour of old parchment. The physician, when he arrived, took one look and shook his head. "He needs warmth and rest, but the cold has gone deep. If he takes a fever..." The man's expression said the rest. They brought Thomas home in a hired carriage, wrapped in every blanket they could find. Henrietta sat beside him, holding his cold hand, praying to a God she had not spoken to since her father's death. Caroline was crying. Eleanor was hiding in the linen closet. The house felt like a ship foundering in a storm. And then, at 7 o'clock that evening, the Duke of Harrow arrived. He must have ridden hard. His boots were muddy, his greatcoat spattered with road dust, his hair dishevelled in a way Henrietta had never seen before. He did not wait to be announced. He walked straight into the house, past the startled footmen, and found her in the upstairs corridor, standing outside Thomas's door. "How is he?" Sebastian asked. His voice was rough, not commanding, just human. "The fever started an hour ago." Henrietta's own voice sounded strange to her ears, thin and cracked, like a bell with a flaw in the metal. "The physician says we must keep it down, but he won't stop shaking. He won't..." She stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth. She would not cry. She would not. Sebastian looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something so unexpected that Henrietta forgot to breathe. He took off his greatcoat. He removed his cravat. He rolled up his sleeves. "What are you doing?" she asked. "There is a treatment I learned of during my time in the army. Cold water immersion is dangerous, but gradual rewarming, skin to skin, body heat, can sometimes draw the chill out more effectively than blankets alone." He pushed open the door to Thomas's room. "I will need basins of warm water, and brandy, if you have it. Not for him, for his chest, to rub warmth into the muscles. Henrietta stared at him. "You served in the army?" "For 3 years, before my father died." He was already moving toward the bed, where Thomas lay shivering beneath a mountain of quilts. "The brandy, Lady Henrietta, please." She went. For the next 4 hours, Sebastian Harrow sat beside her brother's bed. He rubbed warm brandy into the boy's chest and limbs. He held Thomas against his own body, wrapped in a single thin sheet, letting his own heat seep into the child's frozen flesh. He spoke to him in a low, steady voice, not as a duke to a ward, but as one human being to another. "You're going to be all right, Thomas. I need you to fight. Your sister is outside that door, and she is very worried about you. She will never forgive either of us if you give up now." Henrietta stood in the doorway, watching, and felt something shift inside her chest. It was not the easy thaw of affection. It was more like the crack that forms in a dam, small at first, almost invisible, but capable of bringing down the entire structure if left unchecked. At midnight, Thomas's shivering stopped. His colour improved. His breathing deepened. Sebastian eased him back onto the pillows, pulled the blankets up to his chin, and sat back with an exhalation that seemed to come from the very bottom of his lungs. "He will recover," he said quietly. "The crisis has passed." Henrietta crossed the room. She knelt beside the bed, not because she meant to, but because her legs would no longer hold her. She took Thomas's hand, felt the warmth returning to his fingers, and pressed her forehead to the mattress. "Thank you," she whispered. The words scraped her throat on the way out. She felt, rather than saw, Sebastian rise from his chair. "There is no need to thank me. He is my responsibility as much as yours. That is not—" She looked up, her vision blurred with tears she had been fighting for hours. "That is not why I am thanking you." Their eyes met. In the dim light of the single candle, the Duke of Harrow looked less like a marble statue and more like a man. Exhausted, worried, human. There was a smudge of dirt on his cheek. His rolled-up sleeves revealed forearms that were surprisingly muscled, dusted with dark hair. He was, Henrietta realized with a jolt that felt almost physical, beautiful. Not in the way of polished society portraits, in the way of something real and alive and utterly, terrifyingly compelling. "I should go," he said, but he did not move. "It is past midnight," Henrietta said. "The streets are dark. Stay." The word hung in the air between them. Stay. It meant more than she intended. It meant everything. Sebastian swallowed. She saw his throat move. "If you are certain." "I am certain." He stayed. Chapter 3. The Language of Small Things. After that night, something changed. It was not a grand transformation, no sweeping declarations, no dramatic confrontations. It was a slow accumulation of small things. A look held a moment too long, a hand that lingered when passing a cup of tea. An argument that began with heat and ended with something that was not quite laughter, but was not quite anything else either. Sebastian began to visit more often than the quarterly minimum. He found reasons, a new tutor to interview, a question about Thomas's mathematics curriculum, a book he thought Eleanor might enjoy. Henrietta found herself looking forward to his arrival, though she would have died rather than admit it. The children noticed, of course. Children always did. "The Duke likes you," Caroline announced one afternoon, with the bluntness of a girl who had recently discovered romantic novels and believed herself an expert. Henrietta nearly choked on her tea. "The Duke tolerates me. There is a difference." "No, there isn't." Caroline did not look up from her book. "He looks at you the way Captain Wentworth looks at Anne Elliot, all brooding and yearning." "Caroline, put that novel down immediately." "It's Shakespeare," Caroline said innocently. "It is absolutely not Shakespeare." But the words lodged themselves in Henrietta's mind like thorns. "He looks at you." Did he? She had not noticed. She had noticed everything else. The way he remembered that Eleanor disliked lamb and arranged for the household menu to be adjusted, the way he spent an entire afternoon teaching Thomas to tie fishing flies, patient and methodical, the way he had fixed the loose hinge on the garden gate without being asked, using a screwdriver he had produced from somewhere inside his immaculate coat. She had noticed all of it, but she had not let herself think about what it meant, until now. The crisis came in February. It was not a dramatic crisis, no frozen lakes, no fevers. It was worse than that. It was quiet. It was a letter. Henrietta found it on the hall table, addressed to her in a hand she did not recognize. She opened it standing in the corridor, with her coat still on and her cheeks still pink from the cold. "Dear Lady Henrietta, I write to inform you that I have received an offer of marriage from Lord Ashworth of Kent. He is a respectable man of independent means, and he has expressed a willingness to take me as his wife despite my lack of dowry. I have accepted his proposal. I am sorry to leave your service on such short notice, but I believe you will understand that a woman in my position cannot afford to refuse such an opportunity. Your obedient servant, Miss Martha Higgins, governess." Henrietta read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, walked to the morning room, and sat down in the chair by the window. The governess. Their governess, the 3rd in 2 years, was leaving to get married, which meant she would need to find a replacement, which meant interviewing candidates, checking references, and somehow convincing a qualified woman to take a position that had proven notoriously difficult to fill. It was not impossible, but it was one more thing. One more weight on a pile that was already threatening to topple. She was still sitting there, staring at the empty garden, when Sebastian arrived for his monthly visit. He found her in the chair, still in her coat, the letter crumpled in her lap. He did not ask what was wrong. He simply crossed the room, knelt beside her chair, knelt a duke on his knees before a baron's daughter, and took the letter from her hands. She let him read it. She did not have the strength to stop him. "I see," he said when he was done. His voice was very calm. "This is the 3rd governess in 18 months. "The 3rd? "The position is cursed," Sebastian said, and Henrietta startled into a laugh, a wet, ragged sound that was half a sob. "You are not supposed to make jokes," she said. "You are supposed to be stern and disapproving and tell me that I have mismanaged the household." "Have you?" "No. Yes, I don't know." She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. "The children are difficult. Thomas is sullen, Caroline is dramatic. Eleanor is a sweetheart, but she misses her father terribly, and she cries at odd moments. No one wants to stay. Why would they? It is not a happy house." "It is not a happy house," Sebastian agreed. "But it is not an unhappy one either. It is a house in mourning, Lady Henrietta. There is a difference." She lowered her hands. He was still kneeling beside her chair, so close that she could see the individual threads in his cravat, the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw. His grey eyes were soft. She had never seen them soft before. "I am tired," she heard herself say. "I am so tired, Sebastian." It was the first time she had used his Christian name. She had not meant to. It slipped out like a secret she had been keeping even from herself. He did not correct her. He did not remind her of propriety or rank. He simply reached out and took her hand, the one that had been crumpling the letter, and held it between both of his. "Then let me help you," he said. "Not as a guardian. Not as a duke. As a friend, if you will have me." Henrietta looked down at their joined hands. His were warm, slightly calloused in a way that surprised her. She thought of his army service, of the 3 years he had spent doing things she could barely imagine. She thought of the night by Thomas's bed, his rolled-up sleeves and his steady voice. She thought of her father's codicil and how furious she had been, and how wrong she might have been about everything. "I don't know how to be your friend," she admitted. "I've spent the last 6 months fighting you. I am not certain I remember how to stop." Sebastian smiled. It was a small smile, barely a curve of his lips, but it transformed his face. The stern lines softened, the grey eyes warmed. He looked, Henrietta thought, like a man who had been standing in the shadows for a very long time and had just stepped into the sun. "Then we shall learn together," he said. Chapter 4. The Risk of a Heart. 3 months later, on a warm evening in May, Sebastian Harrow knelt in the garden of Vale House and asked Henrietta Vale to be his wife. It was not a grand proposal. There were no orchestra, no fireworks, no crowd of breathless onlookers. They were alone among the roses, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle, and Sebastian had just finished telling Henrietta that he had found a new governess, a widow with 6 grown children, and a disposition of such formidable cheerfulness that even Thomas had been charmed. "You have done so much for us," Henrietta said, her hand resting lightly on his arm as they walked along the gravel path. "More than I ever expected, more than I deserved." "You deserve everything," Sebastian said. And then, because he was a man who had spent his entire life hiding his heart behind walls of duty and decorum, he stopped walking. Henrietta stopped too. She looked up at him, her dark hair catching the last gold light of the setting sun, and he thought, "I would burn down every wall I have ever built for this woman." "I love you," he said. The words came out rough, unpracticed. He had never said them to anyone before, not his cold father, not his distant mother, not the various society ladies who had circled him over the years like moths around a flame. He had not known he was capable of saying them. Henrietta's eyes widened, her lips parted. "Sebastian." "I love you," he said again, because once he had started, he could not seem to stop. "I have loved you since the night Thomas fell through the ice. No, before that. I think I loved you from the moment you stood in my library and told me I was impossible. You were so fierce, so brave. You were everything I was not." "That is not true," Henrietta whispered. "It is true." He took both her hands in his. "I have spent my life being what other people needed me to be. A son, a duke, a guardian. I have never once been simply myself. But with you, Hen, with you I am not performing. I am not pretending. I am just a man who loves you and your family and wants nothing more than to spend the rest of his life making you happy." He knelt. The gravel bit into his knees. He did not care. "Marry me," he said, "not because you need a guardian for your siblings, not because society expects it. Marry me because I am yours, utterly and completely, and because I believe, I hope, that you might be mine." Henrietta stared down at him. The sunset painted her cheeks gold. Her eyes were bright with tears she was trying very hard not to shed. "You are a fool," she said. "I know. A complete and utter fool. I know that too. I have fought you at every turn. I have been rude and suspicious and ungrateful. I have called you impossible to your face." "You have," Sebastian agreed. "It was one of the things I admired most about you." Henrietta made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She pulled her hands free of his, and for one terrible moment, Sebastian thought she was going to walk away. Instead, she dropped to her knees in the gravel beside him. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have loved you since the moment you fixed the garden gate, which is absurd because it was just a gate, and I was supposed to be hating you." "A gate?" Sebastian repeated. "You fell in love with me over a gate." "It was a very loose hinge. You fixed it without being asked. You did not even mention it afterward. You just did it because it needed to be done." She reached up and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "That is who you are, Sebastian. You see what needs to be done, and you do it. No fanfare. No expectation of gratitude. You simply care. He turned his head and pressed a kiss to her palm. I care about you. About Thomas and Caroline and Eleanor. About the crooked step on the back staircase that you keep meaning to have repaired. About the way you hum when you think no one is listening. About everything. Then marry me, Henrietta said. I believe I asked first. You absolutely did not. I am asking now. Marry me, Sebastian Harrow. Make me your Duchess. Let us raise this family together, properly, truly, as partners. Sebastian laughed. It was a rusty sound, unpracticed, as if his throat had forgotten how to make it. But it was real. Yes, he said. Yes. 1,000 times yes. He kissed her among the roses, with the honeysuckle scent thick in the air and the last light of the sun fading behind the trees. It was not a proper kiss. They were both still kneeling in the gravel, and their noses bumped, and Henrietta was laughing even as their lips met. It was perfect. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, in the small chapel on the Vale estate. Thomas gave his sister away, standing tall and solemn in his new coat. Caroline cried. Eleanor caught the bouquet and immediately handed it to the new governess, who laughed and said she was far too old for such nonsense. And Sebastian Harrow, the 9th Duke of Harrow, stood at the altar and watched his bride walk toward him. She was not wearing white. She had chosen a dress of deep gold, the colour of late summer, and her dark hair was threaded with small white flowers from the garden. She looked like a queen. She looked like home. You are staring, she whispered as she reached him. I am appreciating, he whispered back. There is a difference. The vicar cleared his throat. The ceremony began. Afterward, there was a breakfast in the garden, with lemonade and cake, and far too many children running between the tables. Caroline cornered Sebastian by the punch bowl and informed him, with great seriousness, that he was now required to be properly romantic at all times. I shall do my best, Sebastian said. You had better, Caroline said. Hen deserves it. She does, Sebastian agreed. She deserves the world. Henrietta appeared at his elbow, slipping her hand into his. What are you two plotting? Nothing, Caroline said, and fled. Sebastian turned to face his wife. His wife. The word felt new and strange and wonderful in his mouth. She was giving me advice on how to treat you. Oh, dear. Henrietta's eyes sparkled. What did she say? That I must be properly romantic at all times. That sounds like Caroline. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they stood together in the garden, watching their family laugh and dance and eat too much cake. Are you sorry? She asked quietly. That your careful, ordered life has been invaded by 3 children and a woman who once threatened to set you on fire. You never actually threatened to set me on fire. I thought about it very hard. Sebastian smiled. It came easily now, that smile, as if it had been waiting all along, just beneath the surface, for her to call it forth. I am not sorry, he said. I am not sorry for any of it. Not the arguments, not the accounts, not the frozen lake, or the runaway governess, or the loose hinge on the garden gate. Every single moment led me here. To you. Henrietta tilted her head back to look at him. Her eyes were the colour of warm honey in the afternoon light. Then stop talking, she said, and kiss me. He did. And somewhere inside Harrow House, or perhaps it was Vale House now, or perhaps it was simply their house, the clock struck 4, and the children laughed, and the honeysuckle scent drifted on the warm summer air. The Duke's reluctant guardian had finally stopped being reluctant. And that, Sebastian thought, was the beginning of everything. The end. Thank you, dear reader of the Regency Gazette, for joining us in another tale of love, intrigue, and whispered ballroom secrets. If today's romance delighted you, kindly bestow a like upon this video. It helps our Gazette reach more lovers of Regency storytelling. For weekly journeys into dukes, debutantes, scandals, and slow-burning devotion, please subscribe to the Gazette and